Welcome to Outdoor Education's Learn to Sew series. At the end of this 3-part series, you will be able to sew each of these stitches and use them to repair tears, holes, and rips in your outdoor equipment. In this episode, we will cover the materials you will need to complete in-field repairs, as well as 2 basic stitches, the running stitch and the backstitch. Let's go ahead and get started. There are only 2 materials you need in order to repair your outdoor equipment, a needle and thread. I prefer to use unscented, waxed dental floss to complete all field repairs because it's easy to use and very strong. And I'm already bringing it along with me for flossing my teeth. I also like to bring at least 1 safety pin that I can use to hold fabric in place while I'm sewing it. I generally store my needle and safety pin threaded through something soft like an ace bandage or roller gauze. This keeps them secure so they won't poke holes in anything I don't want holes in. To start, cut off a piece of thread or floss at least 2 times the length of your project. When threading your needle, you want to end up with your thread doubled over for additional strength. Tie off the loose ends with a basic overhand knot. The first stitch we're going to cover is the running stitch. It is a simple and fast stitch to sew. The length of your stitches will determine the strength of your seam. Longer stitches are not as strong as shorter stitches, but you also need to be mindful about the thickness of your material. Thin fabrics could be weakened by having needle holes too close together. I'm going to start by demonstrating this stitch with thick cord and paper so it's easier to see. As with floss or thread, I'm going to double over my cord and tie the end off with an overhand knot. This is where the needle would be if I had one this big. In this setup, the white and blue papers represent 2 different layers of fabric that I want to sew together. The blue fabric in this case is resting on top of the white fabric. I've pre-punched holes in my paper so it's easier to sew the cord. I always start sewing from the back side of the fabric so the knots and any messy parts of my sewing will be on the back and not the front of my project. I then pull the thread all the way through until the knot catches in the back of the fabric. Then I poke the needle through the fabric from front to back and pull the thread tight. At this point, I'm on the back of my project again, and I repeat that process, sewing from back to front, pulling snug, then sewing from front to back and pulling snug. I want to make sure that my thread is holding the seam tightly without pulling the fabric in a weird way or causing it to pucker. Once I get to the end of my project, I want to make sure my needle is on the back side of the fabric. Then I tie off the thread in one of 2 ways. With an overhand knot tied against the fabric, or with an overhand knot tied around a different stitch. In this case, I'll tie it off with an overhand knot against the fabric. I'll then trim the excess thread off both ends. And that's the running stitch. Let's move on to a similar but stronger stitch, the backstitch. Once again, I'll demonstrate with cord and paper. This time, I'm not doubling over my cord because of space, but you should double over your thread when doing this stitch. As last time, the paper colors demonstrate different layers of fabric that I've pre-punched holes into. Start on the back side of your project again and do 1.5 full stitches, just like the running stitch, so you end up on the front side of your project. At this point, rather than continuing on like we would have done with the running stitch, we're going to backtrack and re-enter the previous stitch's hole on the front side of the project. Pull through, and then on the back side, we will thread through 2 stitch lengths away. and again, thread back through the previous hole rather than moving forward. Continue on until you reach the end of your seam. You will notice the front of the project looks like one neat, continuous line of stitches, and the backside is a bit messy. This time, I'm going to tie the thread off by tying an overhand knot around a nearby stitch. And that's the backstitch. Now I'll demonstrate sewing each of these on actual fabric to fix a seam that has come undone. Rather than starting my stitch where the previous one ends, I'm going to overlap them by a little bit to increase the strength of the seam and prevent it from ripping further. I'll begin with the running stitch, sewing from one side of the fabric to the other. That looks pretty good, but if I wanted this seam to be stronger, then I could use the back stitch instead. I'll switch to using it now, rethreading through the previously threaded hole on the front side. When I reach the end of my seam, I'll tie it off with an overhand knot around another stitch. Trim the ends and it's all done. Check out the other videos in this series to learn more stitches and how to use them to fix your equipment. Thanks for joining us!